Today I am here with possibly one of the oldest pianos that I have ever reviewed. I've done some interesting videos of some antique pianos, but I feel like this might be one of the oldest and also one of the most well-known brands. I think another one of the old ones I reviewed was a Chickering from around this same period, which is another well-known brand. But today I'm here with a John Broadwood from 1823. Now, what makes this piano so special? Well, the one thing that makes it kind of interesting to me is that it was originally made in London, but yet in 1823 they decided to ship it here to America, which is really interesting, and then it spent the rest of its life here. But one thing that makes it particularly interesting is that this is very similar to the same type of piano that Beethoven would have used. During the time when this model of piano was coming out and being built, Beethoven had started to go deaf, and the present pianos at the time he was having a hard time hearing. So John Broadwood at the time was working on building pianos that had more power and more presence and more volume to them, and around this time period he approached Beethoven and said, basically he said, "I'm building a louder piano. Take one." And so of course Beethoven did, and Beethoven's Broadwood from 1817, just a few years before this one, would have most likely been very similar, and it would have been a similar idea. This is one of the probably one of the earliest pianos that's very similar and very recognizable as a modern day piano. Early pianofortes were just barely removed from harpsichords. They had a similar sound, they had a similar feel, but over time the volume became more loud. They became more suitable for a concert hall. The range got wider and wider. This is not a full 88 keys. It only goes up to a high E and only goes down to a low A, but it's not the A0 that we know today. I believe it's a full octave above that. No, that is A0. It's just missing some keys up on the high end. I never actually even played the lowest note on this piano yet. I've just basically sat down and just been having fun with it. But so it's missing a few keys up here on the top. It's not going all the way up here to C8, but this is somewhat close to what we have today as a modern piano. It's one of the earliest versions of our modern day piano. So I'm going to be giving you guys a review of this piano and showing you some of the really interesting things about it. But first, what I'm going to be doing is taking the action out and showing you that, because that's not something you get to see every day, the inner workings of a John Broadwood piano from 1823. So let's take all of this out and show you guys as much as I can of the action. One thing I did want to mention is that it is a kind of a sealed type of action, so you really can't see too much of the mechanism all that well, but I will show you the hammers and the hammer shanks and the key tops and all kinds of neat goodies about this piano. So let's do that, and I hope you enjoy. So this here is the action out of the Broadwood piano. When I mentioned on my channel that I was going to be reviewing this piano, someone suggested that I take out the action and show you guys how that works, so I'm going to be doing that to the best of my abilities here. One thing that particular viewer showed some interest in was the hammers, and in fact they are rather interesting on this piano. They appear to be replaced because they are made of felt, they seem to be in very good condition, and they have absolutely no wear on them whatsoever. However, they are a different composition than modern felt hammers. They only appear to have one layer of felt. A modern piano hammer would have a second layer of colored felt down here by the wooden part of the hammer, and this does not have that. So that's really, really interesting that these seem to be a different composition from modern hammers. So I would suspect that these have been replaced, but they are to a more period correct composition that might have been found on the original piano. So this here is a close-up of one of the hammers that I was telling you about. As you can see, there is like a little line here that could indicate that there's a second material type of felt down there near the base of the hammer, but unlike a modern piano, it's not a different color, and so I really feel like these hammers are a lot different entirely from what you might find on a modern piano. So it's really rather interesting. They definitely do look new, but like I said, they seem to be somewhat different from what you'd find in a modern piano, so I really feel like these might be a little bit more period appropriate to what would have been found originally in the piano. So here you can see two different hammers, and the one on your left here the shank of it has been replaced, and the one on the right does not appear to have been. So this shank here on the right is an original shank from 1823, which is really, really wild. But as you might expect, over time, hammer shanks will have been broken or have been weakened just due to the ravages of time on an instrument, and so there are about a dozen or so shanks that have been replaced like this one. So this is a brand new hammer shank, and this one here is the original, which is kind of cool. There are a number of ways to fix hammer shanks when they break, but this particular one is a method that I never have seen. Oftentimes, if a hammer shank will snap in half due to the hammer being lifted up a little bit when the action's being pulled out, what'll happen is it'll catch on part of the piano and then just basically snap off. A traditional way of fixing a broken shank is to wind it very tightly with string, and that's considered to be an excellent way of repairing the shank that is equally strong to the original shank. But this one here is one that I've never ever seen before. It's like a piece of aluminum tubing that has been fit or bent in place or something over the shank. I've never seen this before. It's adding a little bit of weight to the shank as well. When I play the key, I don't actually feel too much of a difference, but when I lift up the hammer, this one is distinctly lighter than this one. At least that's what it feels like to me. So this is an interesting way of repairing a hammer shank that I myself have never seen before, but it looks like it worked pretty well. The key bed of this particular piano is also interesting because it appears that everything in the keys is completely original. Of course, back from this time period, ivory would have been used, and as you can see, these are two-piece ivories, and you can tell that because of this little line that's running across the tops of the keys. Basically, this is one piece of the key, and this is the other half, and then they will be joined together, and over time, dust and dirt will collect in that little tiny crack there and form that little line. It's a completely natural feature of two-piece ivories, and it's a way that you can tell when you have a piano that has ivory keys. Also, one-piece ivories have been used in the past. These are considerably more desirable and do not have this little line there, but two-piece ivories are the much more common variety of ivories to see, and they are always nice to run across because ivories have a really wonderful texture to them. I have no reason to believe that any of these have been replaced. They all seem to be original, and they all seem to be in wonderful condition. There is one little bit off camera that has a slight crack in the key tip, but that's the only one that I'm seeing that has any real defect in the key. A lot of times when you have pianos with ivories, the ends of them will get chips and cracks, and this one is in marvelous condition. It's actually really stunning. Also, the black keys of this piano at the time would have been made of ebony, and while it's possible to replace ebony keys and make them look almost as good as the original, I don't believe that any of these would have been replaced simply because of the excellent condition the ivory keys are in. Since the ivory is in such good condition, I think all of the black keys and the ebonies would be all original as well. Now, unfortunately, due to the construction of the action frame, you really can't see too much of the inner workings. It's all boarded up with panels, and it's very difficult to see the inside without removing a bunch of screws and a bunch of wood that, since this isn't my own piano, I'm not going to be doing today. But you can kind of see the inner workings there of the piano, and it is a bit different from what you would find in a modern piano. This is one thing that has radically changed in this piano compared to a modern piano. If we move the back check here, which moves all the action parts, you can sort of see stuff moving in there. But again, there's not a whole lot you can see without removing a substantial part of the action, which is rather unfortunate. But that's about as good as I can do to give you guys a look at the inner workings of the piano. There is information, though, online of schematics of the actions and stuff like that. So if you really want to find out about it, you can do some additional research online. But that's a glimpse at the inside of this 1823 Broadwood piano. On many places of the piano, on both the cheek blocks and on other places of the piano, we are seeing both of these things here. The bottom one is a signature and the top one is a serial number. The serial number appears to say 10185, so that would be the serial number of this piano, and it's repeated in many places all over the instrument, on both of the cheek blocks, underneath of the piano in two different places, so this piano definitely is a real original Broadwood. And this signature down here appears to say F.G. Dove, and that's most likely the person who would have, or the company or the person who would have been behind building and assembling this action. In some of these pianos back in the day, the actions were actually assembled by a different person or a different company, a bit like today, in fact. In modern pianos, Renner actions are used in many different companies, even though Bosendorfer and Fazioli do not manufacture most of the action components. Renner is behind manufacturing the action for these pianos, and the same was actually sort of true back in the day as well. I'm noticing that actually just up here off camera, you can see the exact same signature and the exact same serial number on the top here of the action. And so that's kind of interesting. It might be a little bit hard to see, but the signature is right here and the serial number is right there. So it's just, you know, inches away is the same exact thing. So it's all over this piano. Also, on the cheek blocks, you can see that we have the exact same signature there. There we go. If I turn it like that, you can really see it. To me, it looks like it says FG Dove and 10185. The other cheek block, I believe, has the exact same thing on it. So this here is the inside of the piano, the cavity in where the action goes. And if you've seen the same exact area of a modern piano, you'll see that in reality, very little has changed from 1823 and today. You'll see that many things, in some ways, many things have changed, and yet in other ways, everything is still exactly the same. The idea of everything that's going on in here has remained exactly the same as it is today. For example, if you look here at this little tooth in the middle here, when you push the left pedal, it moves over to the right, which connects to the action, shifts the whole thing over to the right. That exact thing is being used in modern day pianos, including the highest end of contragrands. So that's really, really interesting, and you can just kind of move it back like that. And you can also see that over here, the bottoms of these little things, what happens here is this connects to the back of the key. When you push the key, it raises this, and that raises the damper. Modern pianos work exactly the same way. These have a little bit of felt underneath of them, and while these are a little bit more like raw and rough-hewn than a modern piano would be all machined. These would likely have been, you know, crafted by hand. The same idea is still going on all these years later in modern pianos. So that's really, really interesting to kind of see the evolution of pianos and just see what has changed and what hasn't. In fact, I believe that the construction of the underside of the piano here is basically the same in a modern piano. So it's really interesting to take a look at the inside of an old piano and see what has changed and what hasn't changed. Even though the materials that we may make these components out of and the way we make them may have changed, their exact function and their appearance basically has remained the same, which is really, really interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed that look into the inside of an antique 1823 piano. So now that we've got the action back in, before I play the piano, I figured I would show you this logo, which looks absolutely beautiful. It's really interesting. It's a lot different from what we would have today. Obviously, it's the builder's name and the location of where it was built, but unlike today, where many people would use a metal inlay or a metal decal, this appears to simply be painted on, which is rather interesting, and it's survived very well. It looks like it's probably the original, but it looks like it survived very, very well. Oftentimes these painted logos will have faded. People will touch them, rub them, and they'll be exposed to light and fade. But this one looks like it's in excellent condition, which is really awesome. It looks really cool. It definitely has a unique feel. No one does a logo like this today. There are a few companies like Bose & Differ that use an old style of font, but no one has the huge oval circle, John Broadwood and Sons, you know, that's not, people don't do that anymore. So it's one of the many things about this piano that when you sit down on it, it makes you go, oh, this is really something special. So now I think it's about time that I give you guys a little demo of what it sounds like. So I really hope that you guys enjoy hearing that. Now, before I play this piano, I did want to make a disclaimer about this instrument. It has only been tuned once in the past 15 years. So it'll sound a bit better than you might be expecting, but it does need to be tuned at least a couple more times. It has brand new strings on it, and what happens when you put brand new strings on a piano is they're not used to being under the tension and being stretched like they would be in a real piano when they're installed. So basically, they kind of want to shrink back, and that will cause the piano to go out of tune and go flat. And so when you put new strings on a piano, you will have to tune it over and over 3, 4, sometimes even 5 times to keep it to stay in tune for several months. One good thing, though, about this piano is that it has a new pin block. So once it gets in tune, it should stay in tune, and it does have a metal harp in it as well, which is very good, which of course will help with the tuning stability. So it has a new pin block and a real metal harp. So once it gets in tune, it should be able to stay in tune, hopefully as well as a modern piano would. It's got a brand new pin block in it. But I did want to mention that it is out of tune, because otherwise I would get people yelling about it if I didn't mention that. So I wanted to mention that now before I play it. But now let's play some music on this piano. Normally I would play my original test piece on it that tests out the treble, and I think I will play that later on in the video, but the first couple of things I wanted to play in it would be Beethoven, because I mentioned the sort of connection that this has in a way to Beethoven. It's very similar to the model of John Broadwood that he had in his home and that he composed many of his great works on. So I'm going to play a little excerpt of the first movement and the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata, one of his most famous works, and hopefully you guys enjoy hearing that. Again, the piano is out of tune, but I think once it gets in tune, it should be able to stay in tune, which is really great news for this piano. So even though it's a little bit difficult to tell what the true tone of this piano is due to the fact that some of the unisons are out, I believe this one, which unfortunately was a note I really had to rely on because that was the melody and one part of the song, you can hear the unisons of that note are out. So it's a little bit difficult to tell what the true tone and timbre of this piano is, but you can tell that it sounds a bit different from a modern piano. And I can definitely tell you that it plays a lot different from a modern piano. This action feels very chunky. It feels very primitive. It does not have the light, delicate touch that I honestly expected. The action of this piano is not as complicated as a modern piano, and so I expect it to feel very light and very frail, but actually it's more of the opposite. It feels very substantial, very kind of clunky, very chunky. That's how I want to describe it. It's very, very kind of lumpy feeling when you play. So there were a couple of drop notes in there. I think the C sharp, sometimes when you play it very quietly, it doesn't, yeah, see, doesn't, I want to play again, it doesn't like to repeat. That's probably a simple adjustment in the piano. But if you try to play it very quietly, I wonder if other notes do that too. Yeah, other notes will do it too. So if you don't bring the key all the way back up, it won't always play again. On modern pianos, I think that's been tweaked a bit so you can more easily repeat notes very, very quietly. So that is one drawback to the piano you might have heard in there, that sometimes, because I'm trying to play the piece as quietly as I can, because that's how it's meant to be performed, but sometimes a note or two would drop out. But it's really, really interesting to play on a piano like this. It can give you a bit of an idea, a glimpse into the past of what Beethoven and other famous composers of the era would have had to play and to compose on. So now I'm going to play a quick little excerpt of the third movement as well to give this piano a test of how well it can play loud and fast, which is a lot more of a workout on this piano than it would be on a modern piano. But here you go, here's a taste of the third movement of Moonlight Sonata. I hope you enjoy. As you can hear, there are a few little things that need to be tweaked in the piano, but that's a little bit of an idea of what the piano might sound like when it's being played loudly. Again, it's much more difficult to do on this piano than it is on a modern piano. A modern piano would, especially certain ones that have a lighter feeling action, would be able to handle that very, very well. This one here, it feels more like running through an obstacle course, and it's a lot of a workout. So it's really, really interesting that so many composers back in the day wrote such complex music for these instruments, and I wonder if the action feels chunky simply because it's old and it needs to be worked on a bit, or if that's literally what they felt like back in the day, and yet these composers were able to write such incredibly complicated music on these instruments and so technically complex. It's really, really interesting. So now let me just tell you about a few of the interesting things that make this piano rather unique. Not only is it from 1823, but it has a few unusual design features. One of those would be the pedals that I hope that you can see. They are huge, and not only are they huge, but they are made of wood, which I've never seen before. So yes, that is right. The pedals are huge and they are made of wood. This piano has a rosewood finish on it, and this is the first time I've ever operated a piece of rosewood with my feet, and it probably will be the last. But in fact, we only have two pedals on here. We have the damper and we have the una corda pedal, and there is no middle pedal on this particular piano. But as you can see, the dampers are absolutely huge. They're gigantic. And so the one on the right is the damper pedal, just like you have on a modern piano. And the one on the left is the una corda. When you push that down, which has a very substantial feeling, it's quite satisfying. When you push that down, it shifts the entire action a little bit over to the right and makes the piano sound a bit different, as you can hear there. So those are the two pedals, and their interesting construction really makes them unique. You can definitely see, at least I can, that the damper pedal has been used a lot more than the una corda pedal. The una corda pedal, the edge of it is very flat and there's an angle at the edge, whereas this one here, the shape of the pedal slopes down because that's the pedal that everybody uses. And so over time, the wood has worn away. And it actually looks quite nice. That shape is very nice, the way the front slopes down. But it's really interesting just to see the way that it has worn away over time. I was wondering that myself, and now I can see that, in fact, it has worn completely away, which is really interesting. Another aspect of this piano that is made of a unique material is the casters. So let me show you those. I don't think you'll have ever seen anything quite like this before. Something else extremely unique to me about this piano is the make of the casters. They almost look like they're made of plastic. Normally we see casters on pianos today and they are made of metal. I have seen some early pianos and some other instruments like reed organs that have wooden wheels or wooden rollers. I've seen some antique furniture too that has wooden wheels. But I've never seen ceramic casters before. Yes, these are ceramic. Those are not plastic. It's cold to the touch like ceramic would be, and it looks like it's held up really well also. It almost looks brand new. When you touch it, you can feel that this area is a little bit rough where it's been rolled over the ground, but ceramic looks like it's actually a very good material to make casters out of, other than the fact that if you hit it hard enough, it theoretically would break. So that's really, really interesting. I don't know if it's solid or hollow. If it's solid, it probably wouldn't break too easily, and I imagine it would be because it's supporting a very heavy piano. But that's really interesting that it's made of ceramic. I've never seen that before. Something else you probably noticed too is that the legs are absolutely gorgeous and they have this interesting sort of a cone shape to them. I've heard these be described as ice cream legs. If I zoom out here a little bit, you can see that they sort of look like an ice cream cone if you have a bit of an imagination. But these are sometimes known as ice cream legs, and as you can see, the wood on them is absolutely gorgeous. I can't get over the color of that. It looks super, super beautiful on the film. It's amazing. It's almost like fire. It's really cool. So here's a close-up of the pedals, and as you can see there, they are indeed made of wood. They are made of rosewood, which is an absolutely beautiful wood. The grain patterns in it are always absolutely gorgeous, and you can see here, I'm gonna put my hand next to these, because at the angle I'm showing you right now, they look like a normal size pedal, but if I put my hand in there, you can see that they at least feel to me like they are way bigger than a normal piano pedal from today. And if you look here at the front of the pedal, you can really see what I mean here. The damper pedal, which is the one on the right, it slopes down like that. But the one on the left here, it has kind of this angle, and it's basically, you can see the shape there. It does have a little bit of wear on it. It has a little bit of a slope to it. But basically, no one ever uses this pedal. Everyone always uses the damper pedal. And you can really see there how it has sloped down, and that shape of the left pedal has basically completely gone. It is actually quite a nice shape, like I said earlier. But it's really interesting that it once looked like this, but over time it has worn down into a shape like that. But that is the two pedals of this piano, and also if you look at the lyre here, you can see that it is also a really unique look as well. It is designed to look like a lyre, the ancient instrument that I believe was used in ancient Greece and stuff, and it's shaped like a lyre. That is why that part of the piano is called a lyre. And it's really unique. But the really, really unique feature would be those pedals. I've never seen anything quite like that. Let me show you guys the music desk on this piano, which is another surprisingly complex, interesting feature of the instrument. I've seen a similar design like this, again, on that 1800s era chickering that I mentioned earlier. The music desk on this piano is different from a modern piano. One of the things on this that is radically different from what you see today. The initial design of it is quite similar. There's a little bracket in the back that lifts up and can flap around, and that can be used to set the height at which you want to view the music desk, or you can make it lay down flat. That's very similar to what we have today. You also have a little lip here that can come down, which I don't see much on modern pianos at all, and that actually will hold your sheet music. It's really interesting that they made it do that, but that's so that it can lie flat and the lid can close over it. So that is there, and of course, like a modern piano, this should be able to slide forwards and backwards and eventually actually come off if you slide it forwards enough, but it does seem that it is able to slide back. It looks like that's as far back as it can go, which is surprisingly close to your face. On a modern piano, you can push that way in the back, at least on some modern pianos. You can push the music way, way far away from you, but on this one here, this is as far back as you can go, which is really interesting. Another thing that's interesting about it is these little, I'm going to call them plates on the side here. These can actually move out, and these are designed to hold candles. You can also, today I use them to put my sheet music on, but back in the day you would use them to put a candelabra on, and on some pianos they can even swivel out to be kind of in front of your sheet music, so you can have like they're circular and they'll swivel out to right about here, and then you can have candles that will project light onto your music. This one here, it was stuck earlier. I tried to get it to move and it really doesn't want to, but this one does the exact same thing. It will come out like this, and this is about as far out as they will go, and you can put candles on them to help light up your sheet music, because in 1823 there was no electricity. So that is really, really interesting that those are there as well. This one over here, it moves quite nicely, and then it kind of friction fits in so it doesn't flop around all over the place. This one on the other side would do the same thing. Now I'm going to be giving you guys like a completely in-depth review and showing you all the things that on a normal modern piano I wouldn't bother to show you. I'm going to take off the music disc and show you like the layout of the tuning pins and things like that, because you don't usually get to see what that looks like on an 1823 piano. So let's check that out. So here is what lies underneath of the music desk on top of the piano. This is a design that I see a lot in antique pianos, the way the wood kind of will swell out and there'll just be like a big, flat, empty, unused area over here. This is something you do not see in modern pianos, and I find it very interesting that it's such a common feature. I've seen it on Steinways, this John Broadwood has it. Antique pianos did this, modern pianos don't, and I don't really know what the reasoning behind that is. Perhaps it's because the strings today are longer and are under more tension and they didn't need this space to be used for strings. Really, really interesting. But I do want to show you some of the other unique things about this piano. Again, there's a similar idea going on over here. There's a bunch of unused space going on here that you wouldn't really see in a modern piano either. But a couple of really interesting details to note is that the harp, which this does have a metal frame like a modern piano does, but the frame is actually painted brown, and if you look at it in the right angles, the paint lines almost look like a wood grain. So when I first saw this, I thought these were wooden beams painted brown and that it didn't actually have a metal frame, which would explain why it was out of tune. However, I explained why it was out of tune, and that it does in fact have a metal frame, and the pin block and the tuning pins have been replaced. Like I said earlier, once it gets tuned a few more times, it should stay in tune just like a modern piano would. But it's really interesting that they decided to paint it brown, and I believe this either may be the original paint, or when it was restored they repainted it faithfully to the original design, because I've seen pictures of old original John Broadwoods and they also had a very similar idea. They had a blackish brown kind of a harp. So I don't know what the reasoning behind painting the harp was. Was it because they hadn't thought of painting it gold to make it look pretty? Was it because people didn't like the idea of metal in the pianos, and so painting it brown made it look more like wood, which made it look more normal for the time period? I don't know what the idea was behind that, but it is really interesting. Also says patent here, which is kind of fun. It doesn't say what the patent is about or what years the patent starts in. It just says patent. So that's kind of cute. You can see that the tuning pins have been replaced. You can see that they're shiny. They were replaced. The piano was restored about 15 or 16 or so years ago, which is kind of cool. You can see the hammers in there. You can see what those look like. I showed you those earlier. And another thing I wanted to mention is the dampers. They're a little bit different from a modern piano's dampers. They kind of have a single arch to them. Modern piano dampers, they go up and they kind of have a hump in the middle and they come back down. These are a much simpler shape and they just simply have one arch on them. The felt, as you can see, has been replaced. I would imagine the wooden damper part is original to, 1823. Now they do need a bit of adjustment, like that one note down here, G sharp. That is ringing up, and the damper simply needs to be brought down closer to the string and have a little bit more tension on it. Then that should fix the issue. But those are the dampers of the piano. What I find really funny is that they seem to be a lot smaller than modern dampers on modern pianos are, especially when you get into the treble region over here. Look at how tiny the last little damper is. It's like a little damper nugget. It's really cute. And so the last few dampers here seem to be very, very small. This one's like a little bit twisted. But you can see that the dampers are a little bit different design from a modern piano. One of the things that strikes me as the most unusual about this piano, and this might sound strange because it's just a small thing, but what I find really odd about this piano is that there's only one lid prop. On a modern piano, I've seen up to 3 different lid props. You'll have one that's super long for a concert setting. You'll have one that's around this length, sometimes a little shorter, for perhaps using in home, and then you'll have a little teeny stubby one down at the bottom. I've seen that on like Yamaha and Fazioli and stuff, for a little teeny stubby one, just to let a little tiny bit of sound out and to make the piano a little bit louder than it would be if the lid was all the way closed. However, this piano only has one, and interestingly enough, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. This would kind of be around where like the second size lid prop would be on a modern piano. For reference, a modern concert grand or even a modern 7-foot piano like this would be on the high lid prop setting. The lid would somewhere be probably around here, maybe a little bit lower, maybe about here. And on some pianos, I feel like it's a bit higher, like on a real concert grand, it would probably be a bit higher than this. So on a modern piano, you'd have a very, and that seems like it's really long. I might be exaggerating that, but I really feel like that looks about right, but the lid prop doesn't feel like it should be that long. So I feel like there are some design changes in the lid and the way it interacts with the rest of the piano, because I feel like a modern piano's lid goes up this high, but the lid prop doesn't go this long. That feels really, really long to me. I wish I had a modern piano here so I could look at how that works. But it's really interesting to me that there's only one lid prop here, and it's very low. Another one of the most interesting things about this piano is the fact that it is, in fact, straight strung. On a modern piano, the bass strings will cross over the tenor strings, which allows them to be a little bit longer and gives the bass a more powerful, clean sound. But on older antique pianos such as this, on grands, the idea of cross-stringing at this time had not been thought of. So many pianos of this time would have been straight-strung. Let me show you what that looks like. It's really unique looking. So here is a bit of a better look at the inside of the piano, and as you can see, those bass strings are in fact running parallel with the spine of the piano, parallel with the tenor strings, and they go all the way back to the back of the piano. Straight stringing like this is almost never done today. There's only one modern piano company, I believe in Belgium, that is making a straight strung piano. The idea of cross stringing had so many benefits that almost every single piano manufacturer went over to the cross strung method, or the overstrung design. And this is a really, really interesting look at an antique piano, really a different era for pianos altogether. The sound of it is considerably different, although similar to what we have in a modern piano. And part of that sound difference is because of the straight strung design. There are some people who prefer the sound of a straight strung piano, which is why in fact that piano company that still makes straight strung pianos exists. But for the most part, the cross stringing or overstrung design is seen as a massive benefit to straight stringing, and that's why virtually everybody today and for almost a century has been using the cross strung design. But it's a really interesting look at a straight strung piano. Hope you guys liked that. So now I figured I would play my usual round of pieces and songs that I often play on many pianos. So let's first start off with my treble test piece that's designed to test out the resonance and the sound of the treble of a piano. Let's see how that sounds on a piano from 1823. I find myself playing that song a bit different on this piano than I would on a modern piano. The way the treble responds, it doesn't have the same kind of a flow that a modern piano does. The sustain up here in the treble. Down here it's really good, but down up here, you can definitely tell that it's a bit more percussive and a lot shorter than it would be on a modern piano, which I feel is one of the areas that modern pianos have really, really improved since these times, even though some of the ideas that you'll find on the inside of the piano may have remained virtually unchanged from 1823 to almost the 2020s. This is 2019, I'm filming this video in. So almost nearly 200 years, even though some elements of a piano have remained almost exactly the same, others have changed completely radically, and a modern piano would have a much different sound in the treble than this piano does. Let me play something that tests out the mid-range here a little bit. Another thing that makes this piano a lot different from a modern piano is it's a lot noisier than a modern piano. There's a lot more of these kind of ambient sounds going on with the piano that in a way kind of add to the experience in a very strange way. I don't know if it would have been this noisy in 1823, but you can hear the action. It makes a lot of different sounds when you're playing it. The damper pedal, you might have been able to hear it does need a little bit of oiling, and there's just odd little interesting sounds that are going on in the piano. If you were to compare this against a modern piano on the aspect of cleanliness of tone and clarity, it would absolutely fail. But as a kind of an interesting instrument, it's not quite yet a piano as far as the sound is concerned. You can definitely tell that it's still evolving. The sound of the piano at this time was still changing, and it hadn't quite become what a modern piano is. I think by around maybe 1920 or 1930, we started seeing pianos that really can compete even still with a modern day concert grand. But at this time, the piano was still evolving. People were still figuring out how to get the best sound out of a piano, and you can really kind of hear that. Again, talking about the evolution of the piano, like I mentioned earlier, this is a straight strung piano. So let me play a bass test piece that I wrote several months ago on a Fazioli concert grand, but I'm going to play it on this here. Many people seem to really enjoy it, and I'm so glad about that. I'm really glad you guys like that song. And I'm going to be playing it here just to test out the sound of the bass. This is a 7-foot piano, and I'm really curious how the sound of the bass will compare to our knowledge of a modern 7-foot piano. It has a very, very interesting tone down there in the bass. I don't know exactly how to describe it. With that particular song, it sounded very, very cloudy and just mysterious. It's really, really interesting. The tone of this piano is actually, I'd say overall, it's actually pretty warm. The tone of the piano, a lot of times older pianos get kind of bright and harsh. But I think it's actually overall has a pretty warm tone. Which is very interesting and fit very well with that piece. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing that on an 1823 straight strung piano. It's very interesting. This piano, I kind of feel like the tone of it, the fact that it's out of tune, the little odd clinks and clacks and buzzes, really lends itself well to a piece maybe kind of like this. Let's see if I can play it. I haven't played this one in a while. Something kind of like that kind of an out of tune air. To me, at this moment, it kind of almost fits that piece very well. Or maybe something like this. Pieces kind of like that, I think, might actually kind of work well on a piano sort of like this. And of course, there's always this. Which is that alone kind of reminded me of just how far we've come in a modern day piano when it comes to playing fast, playing quick, making fast movements across the keys. The action of this piano just doesn't like to do that. It doesn't like to play fast and quick and responsive, which is really interesting. Again, I mentioned earlier the way that many of these classical composers and people of this era wrote very, very advanced music for pianos quite similar to this. And it's kind of interesting that they were able to do that. So I think part of the feel of this action is due to its age. And I think if you were to go through and spend a little bit more time with it, its piano could really, really come to life and become something very, very awesome. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this review of this John Broadwood and Sons piano made in London from 1823. This is really something that you don't get to see every day, and it's an absolutely fascinating look into the past, into what pianos used to be, and again, just how far we've come in a modern piano. Modern pianos have so many advantages over this. It's absolutely unreal. The dynamic control, the tone, like I said earlier, the cleanness of the tone. Modern pianos don't have any of these extraneous noises, at least a well-finessed one. Don't have any of these extraneous noises that a piano like this does. But again, that is kind of the charm and the character of a piano like this. It's a very interesting historical piece, and the fact that you can play it and make music with it makes it all the better. And if it were in tune, I think it would be a really, really fantastic piece. But again, one of the best things about this piano, in fact, is that it has that metal harp and that it has a brand new pin block, which should allow it to stay in tune very much like a modern piano would. And so I'm sure that the owner will get many hours of enjoyment and recording time out of this piano. If you're interested in where I found it, I will put the information for this recording studio down in the description of this video. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. I absolutely forgot. But I'm actually in a recording studio today. I'm not in a piano store like I normally am in most of my videos. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review of the John Broadwood and Sons. If you enjoyed it, you might want to go check out my channel and see some of my other content. Like I said earlier, I have a video of an antique Chickering straight strung piano from around the same time period. I think it was a bit later though. And if you're interested in that, you can go check that out as well. And if you enjoy piano related content, you might want to think about subscribing. And if you do that, thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.